If you're like me, you scroll through the news, see headlines about the Middle East and Iran and Israel. They just keep popping up together. It feels incredibly complicated, right? Sort of this tangled mix of history, religion, power politics. It's hard to get a real handle on it sometimes. Have you ever just wished you could cut through all that noise and really understand what's actually driving things, beyond the latest clash? Well, that's exactly what we're aiming for today. In this deep dive, we're using the sources you gave us to really pull apart the layers of this Iran-Israel conflict. Our goal, to get to the most important bits, the core issues, the history, where things stand now, so you can walk away feeling, hopefully, truly well-informed about this really significant global rivalry.
Absolutely. And it's not just looking back, is it? I mean, what's been happening recently in the region just makes understanding this history, these underlying tensions, even more critical. We're seeing how decades of this shadow conflict can suddenly burst out into the open, even if it's often, thankfully, limited. Understanding the why behind it all is just crucial right now.
Okay, yeah, let's unpack that. So when we talk about Iran and Israel, we're looking at two fundamentally different players here. On one side, you've got Iran. Since the 1979 revolution, it's been an Islamic republic run by what we call a theocratic regime, which, for our purposes, basically means religious law and leaders, like the supreme leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, hold the ultimate political power.
Exactly. And then on the other side, you have Israel, a democratic state, Jewish majority, and its governments are understandably laser focused on security and, frankly, survival in a very complex neighborhood. What really defines this conflict, what makes it so volatile, is a few key things all tangled together. You've got Iran's core ideological opposition to Israel even existing. That's fundamental. Plus, its active support for anti-Israel groups. We'll definitely talk more about Hezbollah and Hamas.
Right, so it's not just words.
Not at all. Then there's Israel's deep, long-held fear about Iran's nuclear program, which they see as, well, an existential threat. And all of this plays out through these proxy conflicts, these shadow wars, across Syria, Iraq, Lebanon, you name it. It's how they undermine each other. It's quite fascinating, really, how these strands weave together.
And here's where it gets, I think, really interesting. Because you might just assume, okay, these two have always been bitter enemies, right? But the sources, they show something quite different, actually, a surprising bit of history. Before that 1979 Iranian Revolution, relations were, well, they weren't hostile.
It's almost hard to picture now, isn't it? The Shah of Iran, Mohammad Reza Pahlavi, he actually kept up what the sources call de facto ties with Israel, diplomatic, economic ties. So maybe no grand embassies, but they definitely had working channels, unofficial communication, trade. It wasn't exactly warm, perhaps, but it was pragmatic. A world away from the open hostility we see today.
So if we connect that to the bigger picture, it makes you ask, doesn't it? Is this conflict fundamentally about states clashing over interests, or is it more about ideologies clashing?
Yeah.
Because that shift, that huge change from pragmatic ties to just outright ideological opposition, that completely reshaped the power balance in the region, didn't it?
Oh, absolutely. The 1979 Islamic Revolution just turned everything on its head. Ayatollah Khomeini came in, immediately labeled Israel an illegitimate Zionist regime, cut all ties, just like that. And Iran adopted this really strong, unwavering anti-Israel position. Critically, it started backing groups fighting Israel, so it wasn't just a new government. It was a whole ideological earthquake that reset their relationship and honestly set the stage for decades to come.
And as you can probably guess, this conflict isn't usually about direct head-to-head fighting. That's actually pretty rare. No, it's way more complex, plays out in different arenas. A huge part of it is this proxy war, where Iran backs armed groups that are hostile to Israel. Like take Hezbollah in Lebanon, that's a major one. A Shia militia, heavily funded, trained by Iran. They fought that big war with Israel back in 2006, and they're still seen as a constant, serious threat right on Israel's northern border. Then down south, you've got Hamas and Palestinian Islamic Jihad in Gaza. Now what's interesting there is they're Sunni groups, right? And Iran is predominantly Shia.
And that's a really key point, It shows how, for Iran, the shared goal of opposing Israel can sometimes override those internal religious divides. So yeah, despite those ideological differences, these groups get significant backing money, weapons from Tehran. And it's not just them. Iran also supports various Shia militias closer to Israel's borders in places like Syria and Iraq.
So Israel looks at these groups and sees them basically as extensions of Iran, tools of Iranian policy.
Precisely. From Israel's viewpoint, these aren't independent actors making their own choices. They're Iran's proxies, Iran's way to encircle Israel to threaten it without Iran having to risk its own forces directly. It lets Iran project power, pressure Israel using these non-state groups, all while maintaining, a degree of plausible deniability. It's a core part of their strategy.
And that network of proxies, well, it naturally leads us to where a lot of these shadow battles happen, countries like Syria becoming these central arenas.
Yeah.
During the Syrian civil war, we saw Iran really step up its military presence there, didn't we?
Yeah.
Setting up bases, sending fighters.
We did. And Israel's reaction, it's been incredibly consistent and quite aggressive. Hundreds and hundreds of airstrikes hitting Iranian forces, weapons convoys heading to Hezbollah, Iranian-linked bases inside Syria. Syria has basically become this key battleground for the Iran-Israel shadow conflict. It's like a constant low-brawn air campaign by Israel trying to stop Iran from setting up shop permanently right near its border. It's a real kinetic chessboard playing out.
And then, looming over everything is the nuclear issue. Israel sees Iran's nuclear program as, well, they use the term existential threat, full stop. Iran, of course, insists it's all peaceful, just for energy. But Israel, many Western countries too, they remain deeply suspicious, especially given Iran's past actions and lack of transparency at times.
And that deep suspicion has led to some very real alleged actions over the years. Israel was famously against the 2015 Iran nuclear deal, the JCPOA, right? They argued it just didn't go far enough, didn't really block Iran's path to a weapon. And then you have these reports widely believed of sabotage attacks on Iranian nuclear sites like Natanz, and of course the assassinations of key Iranian nuclear scientists like Mohsen Fakhrizadeh back in 2020.
Yeah, it really makes you wonder just how much of this fight happens completely out of sight.
That's an excellent point. And cyber warfare is a huge, often invisible part of it. Remember Stuxnet? That incredibly sophisticated cyber attack, reportedly a U.S.-Israeli operation, that physically damaged Iran's nuclear centrifuges way back in 2010. It's a perfect example of how this conflict goes way beyond tanks and planes. It's happening in the digital world, targeting critical infrastructure on both sides.
Which takes us neatly into that whole area of cyber attacks, intelligence ops, covert actions. Beyond the airstrikes in Syria or the alleged sabotage, there seems to be this constant simmering campaign of cyber warfare, targeted killings, secret operations. It's widely thought that Israel's intelligence agency, Mossad, has run quite a few risky operations deep inside Iran.
And it's definitely not a one-sided affair. Iran hits back with its own cyber operations. They support hacker groups targeting Israeli interests. This isn't just isolated incidents. It's more like a continuous, low-level conflict fought online and through spies, aimed at disruption, stealing secrets, making every computer system a potential front line. It's this relentless, hidden battle for advantage.
And that brings us pretty much right up to date to the really significant flare-up we saw in April 2024. Things got very tense, very quickly. It started after Israel allegedly hit an Iranian consulate building in Syria, killing several senior Iranian commanders. Iran's response was massive hundreds of drones and missiles launched directly at Israel. That was a moment, wasn't it? It felt like it could spiral into a much bigger war. Thankfully, most of those drones and missiles were shot down, and a lot of international diplomacy kicked in to cool things off.
What's really crucial there, I think, is seeing how those events, that direct clash, were basically a direct result of all these long-simmering tensions we've been talking about. And it happened right in the middle of the wider Israel-Hamas war that started in late 2023. During that war, Iran clearly boosted its support for Hamas, encouraged other groups to escalate, which led to Hezbollah really ramping up attacks along the Israel-Lebanon border, essentially opening up a second front for Israel in the north. It all connects back.
So, okay, pulling back a bit, what does this all tell us about what each side actually wants? What are their strategic goals here? Let's start with Iran. It seems like their main aims are, well, ultimately, to eliminate or at least seriously weaken Israel as a regional force. They also want to project their own power across the Middle East, creating that so-called Shia crescent you hear about, basically a zone of influence stretching from Iran through Iraq, Syria, into Lebanon, and crucially, deterring any attack from Israel or the U.S. using their missiles and, of course, their network of proxies.
And Israel's goals. They're pretty clear, too, and mostly a reaction to Iran's actions. Top of the list, stop Iran getting nuclear weapons.
Period.
They also want to dismantle or, at the very least, contain Iran's military setup in Syria and Lebanon, seeing it as a direct threat right on their doorstep. And underpinning everything is Israel's drive to maintain its military and technological edge in the region. It's absolutely fundamental to their security doctrine, their sense of survival.
And looking even wider, what about the rest of the world? How does this rivalry affect global politics? The U.S. is obviously Israel's key ally, right? Providing support, putting pressure on Iran.
Definitely. The U.S. role is huge diplomatic support, military aid for Israel, sanctions against Iran, its significant military presence in the region itself. It's a major factor shaping the dynamics. But then you have Russia and China who've been getting closer to Iran. That definitely complicates things for Western countries trying to isolate Tehran. It gives Iran more diplomatic cover, more economic options perhaps. It makes the whole international picture much more complex.
And there's that other interesting wrinkle, too. Some of the Arab states, like Saudi Arabia, the UAE, they actually share Israel's worries about Iran's influence. That shared concern has led to some surprising cooperation, sometimes quiet, sometimes more open, like with Abraham Accords. It creates these really unusual alignments based on a common perceived threat from Iran. So after digging into all these decades of tension, this complex relationship, what's the takeaway? What does the future look like? Our sources seem to suggest that while everyone worries about a big, direct war, it's maybe more likely that this conflict just continues simmering as a kind of regional Cold War. Is that fair?
I think that's a very likely scenario, yes. A Cold War fought through the means we've discussed. Constant cyber activity, intelligence battles, proxy conflicts flaring up in places like Lebanon, Syria, Iraq, Gaza. But, and this is the crucial but, this kind of Cold War always has the potential to escalate really quickly, really dangerously, especially if Iran gets too close to what Israel sees as its ultimate red line, actually getting a nuclear weapon. That could change everything.
So here's a final thought to leave you with. Considering just how much of this conflict really does happen in the shadows, through these proxies, cyber attacks, covert ops, what does that actually mean for how we normally think about war and peace? And maybe more importantly, how could this kind of permanent simmering Cold War, fought largely out of sight, continue to reshape the Middle East, maybe for generations to come? Something to keep thinking about as you follow developments in this really vital part of the world.